opportunity, right? Like everybody wants everybody else to win the same amount. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing. Then the best idea wins. Because there's no ulterior motive to, I want my bridge because then I'm going to get a bigger share. So I'm going to push that my bridge is the best idea when it might not be, And then if everything's always equal, then it's just like everybody throws all their ideas in the pot and whatever is legitimately the best idea is going to win, which I think is best for the song.
Totally. I mean, that's why I try to charge by a project and not by the hour also, right?
Exactly.
It's like,
I do the same.
we're on the same team. Let's just try to get this as good as possible. Yeah. It doesn't matter how many hours I have to spend or don't have to spend.
Yeah.
And everyone's just bringing their A game all the time instead of counting the hours.
Yeah. Well, and that's something I recommend to any, kind of newer producer or engineer is I know hourly kind of like they think that it protects them, because then it's like, I'm not going to get overworked, but you'll fall into the trap of someone saying, okay, I'm going to pay for 10 hours. And then you get the production or the mix or whatever it is up to, what you think is like 70%. And then you run out of time and they run out of money, and then it's just over. And then that's going to go out in the world and that's going to have your name on it. And in the beginning, portfolio and credits and is kind of what's going to bring you more work. So whatever goes out there with your name on it has to be amazing. It has to be as good as you can possibly do. So it's worth you charging per project. And if it takes you 24 hours instead of 10 hours to do it, your hourly, if you do the math, goes way, way down, but at least there's something out there in the world that you're proud of, that you can use as a portfolio, and you can try and draw more business.
Yeah, and you've put in more reps.
Yes,
so
exactly.
You're better equipped for the next project.
Definitely.
Hey everyone, you may have heard me mention before that I recently started a Discord server for the podcast. If you want to join the conversation over there, you can find a link in the show notes or on the homepage of this podcast at secretsonics.co. In the coming days, I'm going to be sharing a sample pack there with some of my own personal samples that I use all the time in my productions. This pack will only ever be shared on the Secret Sonics Discord server, so I hope to see you there soon. All right, back to the episode. Yeah, so tell me a bit about your transition from mostly producing to mostly mixing. I guess, you mentioned Corona. Let me know what happened.
Well, fortunately, it all kind of happened before Corona. And it was just kind of a natural, like we talked about the investment of self in productions. There was only so many I could do a year. These were mostly bands I was working at the time. So, kind of indie bands, indie pop, rock bands. And so, they were doing either EPs or full records. So it would be like kind of month-long blocks, where it'd be like, I'm working on this project for 2 months, and there might be a little bit of overlap where I kind of start pre-production on another thing. But there's only so many projects you can do in the year. And so either, if you wanted to grow that, either you have to charge substantially more or you have to try and squeeze in more artists. And it was just getting to the point where it was kind of not sustainable. And I had a lot of clients down in LA because I was down there working with Arn for so many years. And I had a lot of clients in Toronto because of my connections with Coalition and things out there, that I was just getting a lot of demand for mix work. They liked what I would bring to a project, but I wasn't really willing to fly out there to go work on it anymore, And so it just became more of a mix thing, just either go to a studio, record it as best you can, send me everything, and I'll post-produce / mix, which became kind of my niche for a little while, where it wasn't just a mix, it was kind of a post-production thing,
Yeah, can you go tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah,
that sounds interesting.
So I would start often with a pre-production where we'd go through the songs, they'd send me demos, we'd rework arrangements, maybe rework melodies, then they go and just record themselves, because so many artists are very capable recordists nowadays, or, go to a studio and record, capture the best they could, send me everything. And then it would be a lot less of a mix and more of now I'm going to pick up the production from here. So sometimes I would re-edit drums and kind of change the performance a little bit, move fills around or find a beat that really worked for a verse. And okay, let's use that as like the main beat for the verse, even though that's not the way you recorded it. There was one band in Seattle, a band called Marsalis, that I did a couple records with. That started as a mix gig, and they hired me to mix. and then they sent me all the files. And it was one of those things where, you know, I talk a lot about like the artist's intent for the song and me trying to decode what the artist is trying to accomplish with their song versus, you know, what's actually on tape. And it was, you know, kind of a Coldplay kind of indie rock thing where it started and then it would just kind of keep climbing and it would
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Like The Scientist or those Coldplay songs that, you know, they have a verse and a chorus but it kind of is just this growth to this climactic. And the way it was recorded, there was only one guitar. There was no background vocals at all. So he would do these kind of big, long notes, but there was no harmony. So it was like I could hear in the songwriting what the intent was, but where the production was at this moment, it wasn't doing any favors at all to that, you know? And so me trying to reproduce or post-produce, you know, where I would take the guitars from course 2 and double them up with course 1. So now I have double track guitars and then, you know, do that. And then I ended up, I kind of like, there's this barrier of, am I going to start to record my own stuff? You know, they hired me as a mixer, but at what point do I, you know, I can add a shaker loop, but am I actually going to start to like, you know, record stuff? And once you know, it's always a communication with the band and trying to talk with them. And once they kind of gave me the green light for that, it was just like, okay, I'm going to add a bunch of guitars. I'm going to add a bunch of vocal harmonies. I'm going to add a bunch of percussion. And now all of a sudden this is a huge, huge production, you know, which is what I think they were going for. Yeah. And so that kind of continued with a lot of bands I was working with at the time where it was distant production / finalizing / mixing. You know, I still do that to this day with even some of the hip hop artists I work with. You know, they'll send me their tracks and there's a tiny little bit of production additive stuff, you know, where a lot of times they'll entrust me with tuning the voice. And sometimes that involves creating harmonies, you know, using Melodyne or something if you know, some vocal layering wants to happen, or sometimes it's redoing the 808s. You know, a lot of hip hop guys are purchasing their beats from different beat makers, and you know, the level of musicianship versus aesthetic coolness, there's like a spectrum there, you know, where sometimes the aesthetic is perfect, but you can hear that whoever made the beat, their musicianship isn't maybe at a great level because, you know, they used an 808, but it's not actually in key with whatever the sample is, you know, and it doesn't necessarily, sometimes you want it to move with the chords, sometimes you want it to stay on a stagnant note, you know, and so kind of making those decisions. So it's, you know, it's kind of blurring that line between mixing and production.
Yeah. I love it. That's really awesome. And I guess that's like an outlook that you have for most mixing work that gets in, or just depends on the artist.
It depends on the artist, and it's all about communication because, you know, any mixers listening to this, I would 100% advise you not to just, you know, take someone's song and I'm going to change the 808s and I'm going to, you know, move their melody around and, you know, change the melody of their. That's not a good idea without communication. But understanding what the artist is wanting from you when they ask you to take on their project and say, hey, can you, because they say, you know, can I hire you for mixing? But they're actually asking, can you help me bring this across the finish line? You know, can you take this to a level where I'm happy to release it? And a lot of times that is just sonic, like, you know, make sure that the EQ's all good and, you know, make sure that add some cool ambience to the voice and some delay throws and mix and done. And sometimes it's more, you know, like what's holding this production back from reaching that, you know? Is it the delivery of the vocal?
It's interesting. Yeah, because a lot of musicians are very particular, and every single thing is intentional, and there's nothing that's not intentional, right? And then there are artists where it's like, no, this is like whatever you need to do in your mix to make this sound as good as possible. Go take it.
And so a lot of that is understanding through communication the artist's intent and or the producer's intent, but then also understanding, you know, the more you work with them, the more you get to understand, because everyone has different strengths in terms of creating art versus media versus content versus music. You know, like there's that whole spectrum, and everyone falls in different places on the different categories. And so some, you know, like you said, there are artists I work with producers mostly who, produce something and then hire me to mix it. And they're exacting about the details that they're sending me. And it would be a huge mistake for me to change that. Even like delay settings on vocals and, like those kind of producers, I'll get them to send me their Pro Tools session and I'll continue from where, I don't want stems because I want to start from where they left off. And I want to, have everything as they had last heard it. Now I can just massage and accentuate and finalize. But then there's artists that are leaning on me for my musicality and my aesthetic to kind of help take it beyond where they can take it themselves,
Do you find it challenging when you get somebody else's session to kind of reorganize it, make sure you have all the same plugins? And
I hate it. It's impossible. And I've gotten to the point now where it's like I have all the plugins just because of that. Like I use very limited, like I'm not a big tech guy. I just want stuff that allows me to work. And, like I use FabFilter, EQ for everything just because I can just move quickly with it. And I hear the tonality of what's coming at me and I say, okay, this is where it needs to be, and shift and I'm done.
That Pro Q3 is just the best.
It is the best. It is. And it doesn't sound like anything. And I know there's lots of EQs like the Mag EQ and all that have these cool sounds and cool air bands and stuff. But I just I don't care about any of that. I just want to be able to take the song and take it where I need it to go. And so I have very limited tools and they change all the time as to what I'm using in terms of compression. But I have all the plugins mainly just because I want to be able to see where other people left off, which is godly expensive, especially when everyone started getting into UAD stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, I have 27 UAD plugins on here. I'm like, great. Now I got to go buy all of them for like.
The only reason I would even consider a UA interface at this point is because of just getting the plugins.
Mm-hmm. And they're great. I love the plugins.
Yeah.
But I've
been able to hold out for some reason.
Yeah. Well, and my biggest thing is workflow versus the sonics. And workflow always trumps the sonics for me. Like, I know I've done my own tests. I use Plugin Doctor. I use all these things to kind of actually see what my plugins are doing. And I like the UA 1176s better than all the other 1176s. But I almost never use them on a mix. And the main reason is because I need to have a UA interface plugged in for it to work. And if I have a client, which happens all the time, especially with my hip hop and rap clients, where they call me or they send me a text at 11 o'clock at night saying, hey, I'm dropping my video tomorrow and YouTube shot it back because there's a swear in it or something, or, whatever. Can you do a quick edit where you take out that one word and send me and remaster it and send it back to me so that I can upload it and have it ready to go for 9 o'clock tomorrow? And
my God.
If I needed to have just being able to use a laptop and pull up my session and have everything as it should be without, UA plugins not coming up, or we were talking about SonarWorks before, not having my SonarWorks set the way that that workflow trumps the sonics. So I'd rather have an 1176 plugin that I can open up anywhere without, needing to actually plug in go dig out a UA interface or a satellite or something, or worse, drive to the studio at 11 o'clock at night just so I can plug in my UA gear. It's just not functional.
Right. Yeah. I totally get that. Wow. So that's crazy that happens all the time. I'm lucky my studio's in my house, but that does sound intense.
Yeah. It's not. I mean, I've gotten better at boundaries and limitations, and my clients kind of understand, what works with me. But at the same time, I do try and facilitate, I know that that's the world we live in. And it's, when it's something like, and especially the independent artists that are trying to do it on their own, I have to do everything I can to help them
for sure
succeed.
So backbone.
Yeah. And it's kind of like the fact that I decided to use a UA plugin that I can only use at my studio. That's not their problem. That's my problem. And I've just decided to not make it my problem. I've decided to make, I have a really nice Mac tower that I could be using, but I mostly just do everything off my laptop because, and I dock it. I come to the studio and I plug in and I have, all the second screen and all my stuff docked, but I'm taking the actual device home that I mixed the song on. It's not like